Good evening. Welcome to another lens review thing, everyone, and on the menu today, the Nikon Z7 to 28mm f2.8. It's an ultra-wide-angle zoom lens for their full-frame mirrorless Z-mount cameras, although of course it'll work on the smaller sensor DX Z-mount cameras too, where its zoom range won't be quite so interesting though. This lens has only a narrow zoom range, but that bright aperture of f2.8 makes it easier to shoot with indoors or in any other dark conditions, or even for getting more out-of-focus backgrounds, which can look dramatic on ultra-wide-angle optics. f2.8 can be useful for getting more light in for video work too. Its price seems to fluctuate a little, but it's around $1,000 or about £1,000 here in the UK. That's quite a lot of money, but it's certainly less than Nikon's premium f2.8 zoom lenses, so this is intended to be the more affordable option, the mid-range option, but they can often take you by surprise. I'd like to thank Nikon UK for loaning me this lens for a couple of weeks for evaluation, although as usual this is a totally independent review. Let's look at its build quality first. Nikon's mid-range lenses are generally plasticky, but well assembled, and this is no exception. It may not feel like it's carved out of granite, but the lens feels solid, and it's based on a metal lens mount with a weather sealing gasket. It's dust and splash resistant, but for the best protection, you should also put a UV or neutral filter on the front. Towards the rear there is a control ring which can be set to change the manual focus or other functions. It turns very smoothly and the manual focus response is excellent, very precise. As you can see here, the lens suffers from only a little focus breathing. It's a bit worse when you're zoomed in rather than zoomed out. The autofocus motor is very impressive here, fast, silent and accurate as you can see, with no problems tracking subjects. At the front of the lens we have the rubberized zoom ring, which turns wonderfully smoothly, really enjoyable to use. The front filter size is 67mm and the lens comes with a little plastic hood. It does not feature image stabilization. Overall, the build quality here is really very nice, and at only 450 grams or about a pound, it's lightweight too. Okay, let's move on and look at image quality now. I'll be testing it on a Nikon Z7 camera with its 45 megapixel full frame sensor. In-camera corrections are turned on for this test. We'll start at 17mm and f2.8, where the middle of the image is razor sharp with very good contrast. Let's look in the corners. As we look in their direction, the lens stays really sharp. It's only right in the edges that we see some blurriness, so that's pretty good. Stop down to f4 for a little increase in brightness and contrast there. The lens stays this sharp down to about f11, where softness makes itself known due to diffraction, and f16 looks a little worse again. Let's zoom in now to 28mm. At f2.8, again, the middle of the image looks fantastic. Now though, the corner image quality shows more weakness, looking noticeably softer with lower contrast. Stop down to f4 though for more brightness and a little more sharpness, and those corners reach their best at f5.6 with just a touch of extra sharpness and contrast, and they look quite good now. Again, the image stays this sharp down to f11. Well, there you go. Bit of a shame about those corners at 28mm and bright apertures, but really the most important thing is that the lens is sharp across the image frame at its widest angles, which it is. Alright, let's turn off those in-camera corrections and take a look at distortion and vignetting. They are what you might expect for an ultra-wide-angle zoom lens of this kind. At 17mm, some moderate barrel distortion with a moustache-type substructure is there, but it's nothing too serious. More problematic is that vignetting at f2.8. Stop down to f4 or f5.6 for somewhat brighter corners, but they don't get any brighter than this. Let's zoom into 28mm now. That distortion has now flipped into a fairly strong pincushion pattern again, with strong vignetting at f2.8. Those corners brighten just a little at f4, but don't get any brighter after that. So, despite the lens's limited zoom range, you will definitely need to keep those corrections turned on. Okay, let's see about close-up image quality now. It can get pretty close to your subject here, as close as 19 centimeters. Unfortunately, at f2.8, close-up image quality is really soft when you're zoomed into 28mm. It's better at f4, and at f5.6 it's finally lovely and sharp again. So, if you are shooting up close, stop down. Let's see how well the lens works against bright light. At wider angles you'll get some soft, translucent flaring, which will only really be noticeable in critical scenes. If you zoom in, it gets a lot more noticeable, so just an average performance here. And while we're working in the dark, let's take a look at coma levels. At 17mm and f2.8 there's almost no coma smearing at all on bright points of light, which is a nice performance. Stop down to f4 and anything that was there is now gone. Let's zoom out and look for sun stars. They begin to emerge at f8. You can see them in the image corners here. Stop down to f11 or f16 and they get a little stronger, but they're never spectacular. Let's take a look at the lens's bokeh now. It's not that great, to be honest, sometimes looking soft but often looking a bit busy. It's never a serious problem though. And finally, related to bokeh comes longitudinal chromatic aberration. Even at f2.8 it's not too high, and at f4 it's gone. And that's it. Overall, this is the definition of a mid-range full-frame lens in my book. Very good sharpness with no nasty optical surprises, although it's not quite up to the standard of Nikon's more expensive options, and lightweight plastic build quality, but in a lens body that works perfectly fine. The most interesting thing about it is that decently bright aperture of f2.8, and perhaps the most disappointing is that rather narrow zoom range. Still, while it's not the best ultra-wide angle zoom lens in the world, it's certainly good, and it's not bad value for money, so it does still come recommended. Well, what do you think of that one? It's a little alarming to me in some ways that mid-range lenses nowadays cost $1,000. Then again, 10 years or so ago they were nowhere near as good as they are now. I hear that this Nikon lens is suspiciously like the Tamron 17-28mm f2.8, but I've never tested it, so I couldn't say. Anyway, thanks for watching everyone. I hope you found that review helpful, and thanks to my Patreon supporters who helped so much to keep these tests going. Check it out in the description below, as Patreon supporters get all kinds of extra bonus content. Ciao for now, everyone.